Hi, Richard.
Good morning. For those of you who were not with us last week, did you get an update on the part one?
Yes, yep,
So we're all set.
yes.
But anybody did not get handouts?
I did that.
Did-
I had to do confirmation.
I did.
We're still being confirmed.
Pretty sure we email you when it was ready. Okay, good. And then I downloaded it. Accidentally just.
Every day of my life.
Yeah.
I haven't thought of my accent. Okay.
Go to the-
That's separate.
You know, I
Yes.
saw it.
Yeah, I just sit back. I said, this is what time you have to be in the car.
No, I'm
Was that
talking
for me
about
too?
for the, that Halloween. one.
Yeah,
Yes, I guess it is.
thank you.
I think we could probably get started, which I would like to start with the word of prayer. But good and gracious God, we thank you for the blessing of yet another day and the many, many blessings that you give us every minute, every hour, every day, all the time. Bless us as we come together another time to study the subject of grief. We know that there are so many ways in which our faith intersects with the problem of grief. We know that your son was a man of sorrows, despised, and shared with us grief. Bless us in the moments ahead. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen.
So last time, part one, just a quick review. We talked about a society in which grief seems to be in denial. It's a taboo. It's generally a taboo subject, which people are not talking about these days. Maybe they never did. We looked at the many, many levels of grief. The most dramatic one, of course, is death. But there are so many levels and strata of grief that we don't even realize that we are experiencing. A second level would be going blind and amputation. Another rather dramatic forms. But yet another level would be the many losses we experience every day. Some of which we don't even identify. And the one that I pointed out specifically was the aging process. Every year you have a birthday. every once in a while you look in the mirror and find
Who is this guy?
something.
Who is this guy?
I did that first.
And then also the other fascinating part is that as we pointed out last time, that there are it's some of the most wonderful positive experiences of life, a graduation, a confirmation, a promotion. There are actually loss components, which takes grief to yet another fourth or fifth level. Bottom line, we're all grieving far more than we think we are. And consequently, the product of that is that is that cumulatively these little losses can really add up to significant losses in our life experience. We also looked at the why we have losses, and it came to me as an aha moment in my spiritual journey that we have losses because they're connected with our ability to if we were not able, because we are given the ability to love, it turns out that we can only love that which we know subconsciously that we are someday going to lose. It's a sobering, profound theological thing, which came to me in my spiritual journey a number of years ago, thanks to the theologian Henry Nouwen, a Dutch Catholic theologian, who said that basically without that we can only really love that which we know subconsciously we're going to lose. So the idea of loss being connected to our ability to love, theologically, that's an incredible idea. We talked about all unresolved grief being stress, but not all stress is unresolved grief. I'm going to say that till I'm blue in the face. All stress, all unresolved grief is stress, but not all stress is unresolved grief. And then we talked a little bit finally about some of the signs of unresolved grief, which take many different forms. Three of which, the three main ones are physical forms. I made a case for a lot of physical illnesses, injuries being related to unresolved grief. I made a case for mental issues being related to unresolved grief. And finally, just simply our unresolved grief can simply interfere with our daily activities and be hanging over our heads and affect our ability to just function normally. So it will definitely take its form in one way or another. Let's move on to part two. What is the grief process and what things are supposed to happen to get through a loss? I said last time that Elizabeth Cooper Ross in the 1960s brought the subject of grief out of the closet. And she came up with this grief model of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. At the time, it was a tremendous breakthrough because nobody else had really put together a grief framework. The problem is that she was only looking at primarily death as the loss. And since then, we have now been able to connect grief to all numerous thousands of kinds of loss. And so her grief model was great at the time, but there are many, many other grief models that have since emerged, probably hundreds of them. So one of the things I did over a period of years is look at a lot of grief models. And I came up with one that I think it's good. It's simple. It's simple. It captures the gist of most of the others. And this one came from William Worden. Dr. Worden is a psychologist, a fellow at the Psychological Association. He was at Harvard for a number of years, and he was also presently at the Rosemead Psychological Center in California. He came up with a very simple model. And by the way, I actually have heard Dr. Worden in person. I was privileged to attend a number of his lectures. So he says that 4 things have to happen to get through a loss. Whether it's your cell phone, whether you've lost by death your closest friend, your spouse, whether you've lost your keys. Ironically, William Worden says the same 4 things have to happen in order for the loss to be resolved. Before I proceed, a couple of caveats. And we're going to go through these 1, 2, 3, 4, but generally grief progresses through these 4 in this order, generally. But sometimes we are weaving in and out between number 3 and number 2 and number 1 and number 4. And we have to be aware of that. Secondly, there's a phenomenon known as anticipatory grief. Anticipatory grief. This is when most of the grieving is done in advance. And a typical example of this would be families and friends of a terminally ill person who are basically doing their grieving in advance. And when the moment of death comes, it comes as a relief. And then they start feeling guilty. Like, why am I
Right.
feeling guilty when my loved one has died? But the reality is that they really are feeling relieved.
Richard, can I ask, is
Please.
there,
Please.
is there any kind of evidence to or that related to, like, not just terminally ill, but say dementia patients or people with dementia or Alzheimer's, that kind of anticipatory grief? I know I've sometimes.
Perfect example. Perfect example. A loss that is spread out over a period of time would definitely fall into this category. So let's look at these 4 steps. The first thing that has to happen, according to Warden, is that we have to be able to actualize the loss. Actualize the loss. Grievers tend to rationalize or deny their losses. We play mind games using language that assists us, them, everybody, using language that helps us camouflage our actual losses, such as the first thing that happens when the first expression that people use is, I don't believe this. This maybe it's a bad dream from which I'm going to wake up any minute. I guess I really didn't want that job or promotion anyway. In that relationship, I gave more than I got, so it's just as well. A divorce occurs. A divorce occurs, and a well-meaning friend says, "You're better off without him or her." What the friend has said might be true, but in saying that, the well-meaning friend has hindered and not helped the griever. And one of the premises that you're going to hear more and more throughout this session and the next one is that the problem that people make in trying to help other people, and in sometimes trying to help ourselves, is that they're constantly trying to minimize the loss. This isn't as bad as you think it is, or these kinds of expressions.
You didn't really lose something.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. When in fact, to get through grief, the thing you have to do is actualize, in the words of Warden, actualize the loss. No pain, no gain. And so we are constantly, we have to really work at this. We have to be intentional about maximizing the losses, particularly when we're helping other people, which we will talk about mainly next week.
Okay, can I?
Please,
Now, you said this is the first step?
the
Denial?
first step.
See, okay, so Beverly asked me about my sister this week, so I actually called her to see how she was doing. And now her son died like over a year ago. And this is what she said to me, I'm in denial. So, but you said she can flip around, right?
We can weave it in from one section to the other, and one day we're number one, another day we're number 3. Yeah, it doesn't.
I'm in denial now.
I'm presenting a model which is very clean and neat, but in real grief doesn't operate in a very. It's
That is true.
quite such an organized way.
So true.
Yes, thank you.
Can you be in denial, you just say I'm in denial?
Right, I was just gonna say, so like saying I'm in denial, is that really just I don't want to talk about it?
Well, she said, I'm not going to my grief group anymore. I'm not, I'm like,
So a
oh,
lot of
okay.
people do.
Not like,
Yeah.
what do you say to that?
Right, if I don't talk about it, it didn't happen.
Right.
Which I
Yeah.
guess is
But to put a label on that is to recognize
That's what
that
you
denial is
do.
a thing
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
the, the loss is in fact there, right?
Right.
You can't really deny the loss and say you're in denial.
This idea of actualizing the loss is so important that because some losses cannot be actualized, they are the worst kind of a loss. Military personnel missing in action.
Mm.
A child running away from home has never been seen again. When I was a designated hospital chaplain on call, and I was notified of a death at the hospital, my first question would be, is the family present? And if the administrator at the hospital said, no, but they're coming in, I would actually go to the morgue, get the remains on a car, transport them to the chapel, where the loved ones could look and verify, actualize the loss of their loved ones. This is why I'm troubled by, one more thing. The example of an airplane crash in Europe. There was an airplane crash in Europe, and there were a number of Americans on that plane. The widow of an American who was on that flight was given some German coins and pictures of their children, which were retrieved from her husband's wallet. She said, I really needed to know that he was on that plane.
Mhm. You have pregnancy on this list. And when Sarah was born, when I was pregnant with Sarah, it was just a very abstract idea. Like I knew she was there, but I didn't, and I could feel her and stuff, but it just was very, we had tried so hard to get pregnant. And it just was very abstract to me. And I told the doctor and Barry, I was like adamant. I was having a C-section and I was adamant that I wanted to see her come out of me. I wanted that mirror up. I wanted to see. And the doctor kept saying, it's not going to be pretty.
You don't want to see it.
You don't. I don't know that seeing yourself cut in half is a good idea. And I was like, I need to see this baby come out of my body. I need to register that that kid is, and they didn't do it. So I fell into deep, I'm not saying this because I didn't get to see her come out of my body, but I was deeply in postpartum depression for a good year and a half afterwards. And she and I did not connect. Nursing, she and I did not connect. We did not do the ILAC. She did that with Barry instead of me. You know, as they were sewing her up, he got to hold her. She locked eyes with him. He got to take her away from the table and do the cord and all that stuff. So she got connected to him instead of to me. And I often hadn't actually thought about this until today, when I saw pregnancy on the list. And I just, it took a really long time for me to be like, that's my baby, my child.
Actual.
Yeah.
Okay, number two, actualizing the loss, number one. Number two is experiencing the pain. Now we have a problem with this term pain. In our English language, it's typically associated with a physical discomfort. Whereas in other languages, pain has a much more universal context. German comes to mind. The German word Schmerz. The German word Schmerz means that my body is in pain, probably in pain. My mind is in pain. My emotions are in pain. My spirit is in pain. My whole world is in pain. So when we talk about the pain of grief, we have to kind of think in more generic terminology. In this regard, I researched the literal meanings of some of the biblical Hebrew and Greek words that often appear in biblical translations into English as the word grief. This is really revealing to me, and they help us understand that the pain of grief is much more universal, and it can take many different forms. Some of which are just not appropriately expressed by the word grief. First, from the biblical Hebrew, in Genesis 6, Esau marries 2 wives, both of whom were Canaanites. And Isaac and Rebekah are very, very upset about this. They are grieving, the Hebrew morah. A more accurate translation of that word in Hebrew would be bitterness. Bitterness. And who of us doesn't know that part of grieving is bitterness? In Ecclesiastes 2, the author is describing the futility of the human situation. All is vanity, all of our days being painful and grief-filled. A more accurate translation of the Hebrew kas, K-A-S, is sad anger. Sad anger. In Isaiah 53, the suffering servant is described as being despised and rejected by humankind. A man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. The Hebrew chalah would more appropriately read weakness, sickness, pain. See, this shifts rather than just grief, it shifts to a more subtle number of meanings. Likewise, from the New Testament Greek. In Mark 10, the rich young ruler is grieving because he's been told by Jesus to give up his many possessions. The literal meaning of the Greek lupe means feeling afflicted. He was more than just sad. He was feeling afflicted that this was being asked of him. In Galatians 6, Paul instructs the Galatian Christians to bear one another's burdens. Here, the reverse situation takes place because baros, the Greek baros, could also be translated griefs. So we have the opposite thing going on there. The common thread points us toward things that usually weigh us down. Griefs might top the list, both for Galatian Christians and ourselves. Like actualizing the loss, the many dimensions of pain or grief, we would rather sidestep. But in the words of a bereaved mother, say it best: if you don't feel the pain, you aren't going to heal. No pain, no gain. These examples hint at the many dimensions of the pain of grief, which, like actualizing the loss, is something that the griever would rather sidestep. Quoting the Catholic, this raises another aha moment for me in my grief. Quoting the Catholic theologian Richard Weeden, the place of the wound is the place of the healing. The place of the break is the place of the greatest strength. There's a mystery here that I kind of get, but I kind of don't get. Richard Rohr, the place of the wound is the place of the healing. The place of the break is the place of the greatest strength. And I'm going to quote Rumi, a 13th century Islamic scholar, who says virtually the same thing. The wound is the place that light enters you. The wound is the place that light enters you. You can call it mysterious, you can call it paradoxical, even contradictory, but it is the reality, with the thought being no pain, no gain. Eric Lindemann was probably the first US grief researcher who did most of his work in the 1940s. And here's what he wrote about the pain of grief. And our impulse to dodge it. He says one of the big obstacles to grief work seems to be the fact that many grievers try to avoid both the intense distress connected with grief, with the grief experience and the pain of grief itself. The feelings of pain and grief have to be felt. Anger, frustration, sadness, bitterness, hopelessness, helplessness. Don't cry out loud, keep it inside, you've got to hide your feelings. That's from an old Melissa Manchester song. Don't cry out loud, keep it inside, you've got to hide your feelings. It's all too often the human situation regarding how people are expected to grieve. I'm going to quote Bertha Simons. She was a social worker. I quoted her in my part one. She says, because of the cultural emphasis on confidence, adequacy, and strength, the bereaved are often prevented from experiencing the very emotions that should follow loss in order to find a healthy resolution. And we live in this culture that says, you gotta be strong. Right? You gotta be strong. And we try to say that to ourselves. I've gotta be strong. When in fact, that whole cultural emphasis is it's exactly the opposite to what we need to hear to get through grief. Sometimes we have to be weak. And there's some paradoxes from biblical. There are some biblical analogies to this, Pastor. Weakness.
Yeah, my strength is made perfect in weakness.
Yes, exactly. And the cross is the ultimate. The cross is the ultimate example.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Where God's strength is ultimately strongest in the weakness in sending Christ and the cross. Washington, one more quote. Washington Irving says, tears are sacred. They are not marks of weakness, but of power. They are messengers of grief and of unspeakable love. Now, a quick caveat here on gender differences. I don't want to get into as we all know, women are much more prone, women to cry more easily. Much of this thought can be cultural in nature because from the time men are small boys, they're taught crying is not what men do. It's a taboo. And by the way, this goes all the way back to Shakespeare in As You Like It. Celia says to Rosalind, tears do not become a man. Tears do not become a man. Or you want a more modern version, Marvin Gaye, I heard it through the grapevine. Okay? I heard it through the grapevine, Marvin Gaye's greatest song. I know a man ain't supposed to cry. That lyric is right in the middle of that song. This custom does seem to be gradually changing for the better. And the example that I use for that is Michael Jordan accepting the NBA trophy, who actually broke down not once but twice. Now, tears of joy, yes, not tears of sorrow, but nevertheless tears. And I think that in those moments, Michael Jordan was a greater example to young boys than anything he did on the basketball court. I just have to believe that. One more thing in regard to these differences in gender. We have typically explained them culturally, but it turns out that recently recently a hormone was discovered in women called prolactin. And and this researcher, in the work of this researcher, it was concluded that prolactin is a hormone that women have, but men do not. And it's also one of the things that prolactin does, it enables women to cry freely. So it's not all cultural. It's somewhat physiological.
The other thing though about expressing your grief, I mean, I know some of us are better at it than others, but part of it is that the people that you're expressing grief to don't want to hear about it. They don't want to, they don't, or if someone, a friend of yours is expressing grief to you, it's like, oh gee, you kind of push back from it or something, because I guess because it brings back stuff in your own life, I suppose, but I think a lot of it is just like it's hard for us to share all that. It's
We're
a
gonna talk a
challenge.
little bit more about that next week.
Yeah, it's a real challenge.
Okay, we've gone through actualizing the loss, experiencing the pain. Now we come to number 3. Redefining one's life in light of the loss. Redefining one's life in light of the loss. The third step in grief in Morton's law. In this step, the griever puts the loss into the context of his or her, the rest of his or her life, loosening the connection between the griever and the lost person or thing. The question asked here, the key question is, how will my life be different now? How will my life be different now? As this question is seriously addressed and then answered, the grief work at this point takes a turning point. And there are many other organizations, nonprofits that have recognized this. The 4th step, for example, in AA, is for the recovering alcoholic to take a searching and fearless inventory of his or her life. This is exactly what we're talking about when we talk about redefining one's life in light of the loss. So again, quoting Eric Lindemann, when you have an incongruity between your own self in terms of what it used to be and its future operations in terms of what it can be, you are likely to find remarkable grieving. Lindemann is saying at this point that the grief work is really progressing and the griever is actually on the way to doing what has to be done to survive the loss. 4th step and final step in Worden's grief model. Reorganizing or rearranging one's life by reallocating the energy previously expended in a lost person or thing. So we've gone from actualizing the loss to experiencing the pain to asking how will my life be different now? And then at some point reinvesting energy or reorganizing one's life in terms of what got lost meant. This loss, more or less, this step more or less falls into place if the 3rd step, how will my life be different now, is seriously addressed and answered. For some people, this could mean a new hobby, an activity, a new relationship. For others, an investing of more energy in an existing activity or relationship. But notice that in this last step, the posture is active rather than passive. I'm going to buy a new cell phone. I'm going to try to figure out what was in my wallet and then go from there. Or I'll go over to the DMV and get a new driver's license. I mean, these sound like great things, but you know, it's the same 4 things. It's the same process that you go through. And I find myself I have actually find myself in trivial losses going through these same, I mean, I lost 2 cell phones in a month. I mean, both in doctor's offices. I mean, how could that be? But I found one and I think the other one really was lost. But I mean, it's just, the point that I'm trying to make is that, these same steps, whether you realize it or not, you're actually going through, whether someone died or whether it's your keys. A commonly asked question, and by the way, when I heard Dr. Weeden lecture, this question was put to him. The commonly asked question is, how do you know when you are through it? How do you know when you are through it?
When I put the keys back in my hand.
I thought Dr. Weeden's answer was very, very incisive and profound. He said, when the retching pain becomes a mellow sadness. When the retching pain becomes a mellow sadness. Carol Channing commented on the loss of her closest friend, who happened to be Mary Martin, two legendary performers. Carol Channing said, "I know I will miss her the rest of my life." So in other words, the loss is there, and you will probably, many losses you will never forget. You will never forget the person or the or whatever it is. But you'll be able to address that loss in a different way and see it in a different way. Sometimes being able to also bring a humorous spin to the loss. You may remember something, if it's a person that died, you may be able to finally at some point look back and smile at some quirk of this person, or some experience that you had with this person that you shared a laugh. And by the way, speaking of sharing a laugh, I have to bring in one more song from Barbra Streisand. It's from I think you heard the song. You'll know it when I get the quote. It's the laughter we will remember whenever we remember the way we were. I think the song is.
Yeah, it's the way we were. Yeah.
It's the laughter we will remember whenever we remember the way we were. So what factors are known to influence the grief process? There are numerous ones, but I'm going to just go down some of these quickly. I'm doing on time. Okay, so far so good. One's personal grief history. If I would sit down with everybody in this room and take a grief history, so I mean, I couldn't do it, but a social worker can actually do it. So that's what social workers do. I could go back to having you identify your first loss. Typically, by the way, a family pet, but also it could be a grandparent. And I would tell you that how you experienced that loss influenced how you experienced your next loss, which could be the other grandparent or another pet or a friend of the family. And so cumulatively, we have a grief history. And for some of us, that's very healthy. And for others of us, it's not very good. And that's why people with complex grief histories or difficult grief histories have to be very careful in terms of the way they face subsequent losses. Physical health. If you're not feeling well physically, you aren't going to do things as well as if you felt well. And that would include grieving. Emotional health. Likewise, if you are not in good shape mentally or emotionally, you will not do good grief work. Personality variables, all of a person's general personality traits. There is grief research that indicates that a very strong correlation between a person's self-esteem and his or her ability to do healthy grieving. If you basically feel good about yourself, you'll do better at everything, including grieving. Substance abuse, studies have confirmed that there's a strong correlation between substance abuse and one's ability to do grief work. Ambivalent relationships. If, for example, in a bad marriage that never quite got to divorce, one of the persons dies. The survivor's grief is especially difficult in situations like that. Finally, the relationship to the lost person or thing, and whether or not the grief was preventable or unpreventable. Here's where I go to handout number 3. This was another aha moment for me. Carolyn Woodward is an RN. Carolyn Woodward has done a lot of grief research. Just pass these around. So it turns out that if you know 2 things, whether the loss was preventable and how central or peripheral the person or thing was in your life, you can actually predict the longevity and the intensity of the loss. And again, I just have to tell you that this came to me as an aha moment. Notice in this little table that it's not just the reality, it's the perception. And that's a key part.
Yeah.
I want to look at this table a couple of quadrants at one quadrant at a time. First, the upper row to the left, where the loss is preventable or perceived as preventable, and the person or thing is central in the griever's life. In this case, the grief will be intense and prolonged. Deaths from suicides, homicides, and accidents are obvious here. But the perception part is also huge. Losses that might be defined as unpreventable, such as dying from natural causes, could also be perceived as preventable. If only I had insisted that he got to the doctor, that he saw the doctor right away, instead of accepting his saying that he would probably be okay. In this case, the survivor is her or his interpretation. And by the way, deaths from homicides, suicides, and accidents indicate, just as a general rule of thumb, about 15%. So we have about 85% chance of dying from the natural causes. We have about a 15% chance of dying from accidents, homicide, or suicide.
That's happy.
No,
Well, that's just happy.
well, the way it is.
But that wouldn't be true in some groups of people.
What?
That wouldn't be true in some groups of people.
Such as.
Well, I mean, think of people living in poor and depressed, financial and difficult environments, and where there's a lot of murders and acts. I don't know.
No, you're absolutely the sample of people that's based on.
Yeah.
It would be interesting.
Okay, take it back.
Nice. Yeah, I think it would be interesting to know like if it changes with demographics.
I was just generalizing. And
Yeah.
there are some data that actually support that in a very general way.
Right.
Can open worms everywhere.
Moving down the table. To peripheral in the griever's life and loss was preventable. The grief will be mild and prolonged. If you knew of someone, say a distant relative or a not so close friend who took their own life, that person will simply pop into your minds unexpectedly and periodically for a long time. Or even almost a mundane loss. Here's just, the subtleties in the whole loss thing. Someone in one of my exercise classes, I saw him or her, I can't remember which gender, for years, literally years, every once a week in my exercise class. One week I go in and this person is not there. Maybe they're on vacation, whatever. The next week, they're not there, I never see them again. I've never seen them to this day. And does it cause me to lose sleep at night? No. But it does every once in a while. Like, I don't know, I could be driving along in my car with music on. I think of this person. It's been a really fascinating phenomenon. Moving up and to the right on the table, an example of the intense and brief quadrant would be a loved one who dies of a natural illness, has been chronically ill, is very elderly and fragile. Roughly, again, it falls into that category of natural deaths. Finally, moving to the lower right quadrant of the table, an unpreventable loss in a peripheral relationship with the grief being mild and brief. This one is really, really deceptive. Anyone in any role whose profession or occupation brings them into contact with someone briefly, relatively briefly, and then they never see the person again. Anyone from a teacher to a plumber, from a teacher to a plumber, to an electrician, to a professor, to a salesperson, to an engineer, to an architect. I mean, the list would go on, would literally go on forever. Anytime you're dealing with one person briefly, and a strong probability you will never see them again. The associated grief is going to be mild and brief. But I point out to my friends, and I have a number of friends in these occupations, that cumulatively, the mild and brief encounters griefs are going to accumulate, and they are very, very vulnerable for unresolved grief. Any questions on Carolyn's table?
How long is prolonged? How long is prolonged?
Oh, it's a great. Only Angie would ask that. That's a great, seriously, what's a big one? What?
And you don't know how to answer it?
I guess
I set you up, I'm sorry.
I think it's relative. It's relative. I think it depends on how each person addresses that particular aspect of their grief. For some people, it can be years. For some people, it can be days. I mean, it just depends on the loss, and how they perceive it. But that points to where prolonged grief becomes something that they call pathological grief. And at that point, you are in trouble, and you should probably get professional help. We're going to talk quite a bit more about this next time. But prolonged can be relative. But that's why it's so important to know what grief is, and so important to know a little bit about what happens or what should happen, and And in particular, the subtleties of grief, the subtle losses. That's why those things are very important to know. Because if we don't have some grasp on unresolved grief, then it prolonged is going to stretch out to who knows how long. And part of that is because of this whole denial thing. Just all kinds of mechanisms that we use to postpone grieving. It's a great question. Thank you.
My question relates to ongoing. I have grief, a situation that in my life that causes grief on a regular basis and is ongoing and will probably never go away.
That's comparable to the example that I said earlier, where okay,
Oh, and I'm firmly stuck in anger.
there's a parallel here to the whole principle of forgiveness. Okay, the expression "forgive and forget" is a terrible expression. It's awful. You could. I mean, it's a terrible, awful expression. Forgive and forget. It's nonsense. It's nonsense. It's out of touch with reality. In most cases, we can never forget. But in the case of, I think it was Paul Tillich, the theologian, he says, forgiving is forgetting. Forgiving is forgetting, is remembering it. I'm not going to get this right. Forgiving is forgetting in spite of remembering, something like that. It's a quote that I'm paraphrasing. I'm not doing a very good job. The point is, there are a lot of situations which, in most of the time, we will never forget, and we will think of that hurt that has been done to us. I'm talking now about forgiveness, not grief. That hurt that has been done to us, which we will remember the rest of our lives, and we will remember maybe every day. In the case that you just said, anyway. But in spite of not being able to forget, we forgive, and that's the grace, that's the grace, if you will, of forgiveness. That's why forgiveness is a gift. Forgiveness is a gift from God. It's a gift of God, and there could be. I'm getting now on a tangent. There could be reconciliation without. There could be forgiveness without reconciliation. Even because there could be forgiveness without reconciliation, because sometimes the other party that offended us will not forgive us, but we can forgive them. We can forgive them.
How do we get to that though?
Well, easier said than done. Easier said than done. As most of the things are in living the Christian life. Easier said than done. I thank you for attending. Next week, we're going to move into some practical applications. The do's and don'ts.